Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us today for KnowledgeWorks Global Limited Successful Recruiting and Onboarding of your Editor-in-Chief. I'm Lisa Marshall, a Senior Consultant at KGL Consulting and moderator of this session. A few housekeeping items while people continue to join. The webinar is scheduled for 60 minutes. It'll be recorded and all participants will be muted for the duration of the session. The agenda for today's meeting is as follows. First, I'll introduce the panelists. We'll then look at an outline of the basic recruitment process to provide a framework for the panelists' comments. Then we'll turn it over to our panelists. All of them have recruited an editor-in-chief in the past year, so we asked them to present what they found to be the 3 or 4 most important aspects of a successful EIC search. Please feel free to place questions in the chat throughout the session. There's a large number of people on the call, and so we'll try to answer as many questions as possible at the end. Again, the session is being recorded. And those of you who have registered will receive an email with a link back to the recording of the webinar. The webinar will also be posted on KGL's website. I'd like to start with some brief high-level introductions of our panelists. I'm very excited to have the 4 panelists with us today. As mentioned, all have conducted successful editor-in-chief searches very recently. To start us off in a few moments will be Jane Hiebert-White, Executive Publisher of Health Affairs. She'll share some interesting tactics that Health Affairs employed in their search, which included surveying the audience. Health Affairs is a self-published journal, and a new journal, Health Affairs Scholar, works with a large publisher. We're happy to have you here today, Jane, and look forward to your insights. Judie Lieu is Gerontological Society of America's Vice President of Publishing and Professional Resources. GSA has 5 journals with 7 editorial offices. Judie's going to focus on the EIC recruitment process and provide some excellent tips and details to improve outcomes. Thanks for joining us today. Jason Pointe is Publishing Director at the International Anesthesia Research Society. We'll be covering the topic fresh from a process that recently concluded. IARS has 2 journals, one of which has numerous affiliate organizations. So glad to have you today, Jason. Sara Heukerott is Associate Director of Publications at the Association for Computing Machinery. She's responsible for the ACM Journals program, which includes 70 journals. Prior to ACM, Sara Kate spent nearly 12 years at Springer Nature, most recently as executive editor responsible for the Material Science and Applied Physics Journals team. Thus, Sara Kate brings both the society and commercial publisher perspectives. Thanks for joining us. I'd like to quickly show the basic steps in the recruitment process to provide context for the panelists' comments. Some of our panelists will talk about additional steps introduced to suit their organization's particular needs. So we'll be interested in hearing more about those. These are the basic building blocks our various speakers will touch upon during their presentations. Depending on the various factors that our panelists will discuss, working through these steps can take 4 to 5 months at the fastest to 1 year or more. As a reminder, after they present, we will field questions from the audience. Please place your questions in the chat. I'm now going to ask Jane to take over.
Thank you, Lisa. Jane Hiebert-White from Health Affairs, and I'll be talking in particular about our very recent search for an editor-in-chief for Health Affairs Scholar. Next slide. So a couple of questions that sort of set the stage of our search process and that you may want to think about in your own search. First, what does the journal audience want? Second, equity, inclusion has become very important within our whole ethos at Health Affairs. And so we specifically thought about how we wanted to advance DE&I. And then number 3, how do we reach beyond candidates that we know? You know, we think we know the field, but who may be out there that didn't immediately come to mind? Next slide. So we started actually with an author survey. We surveyed the 3 years worth of authors out of our manuscript submission system at Health Affairs, you know, preparing for a new journal. So a number of the questions were, of course, to inform the new journal launch, but the questions also helped inform our editor-in-chief search. We asked about what are the topics of most interest. That led us to think about who might make the best EIC. And then in particular, learning about what people in our field think about open access, because this was or is an OA journal, also led us to think carefully about who would be supporting OA and also how they feel about willingness to address OA equity barriers. Like, quote from the survey, we had 400 comments. I like the concept of the new journal. I just think open access in general is restrictive from people who are from under-resourced institutions or do not have large grants. So that was typical of some of the kinds of comments. Next slide. So when we set our search committee, we wanted to address equity goals starting up front with the composition of the committee. We kept the committee small, 5 members, and tried to achieve an array of diversity across multiple areas, such as gender, 2 women, 3 men, race, ethnicity, 2 Black, 3 white, internal versus external. We had 3 staff leadership people on the committee, 2 external, 1 was a board member from Health Affairs, and 1 was a grant funder who also was a researcher. Range of disciplines for our multidisciplinary field. And really what I want to get at with this is representation, in our view, needs to be more than just token, like not just, oh, 1 member on the committee is the DEI member. Next slide. So using a seed list process really helped expand our reach. And this is where we pulled a bunch of names from a variety of sources, put them into a spreadsheet, including from competitor journals, with input from the board and the committee itself. We asked senior staff at Health Affairs, we looked at who are frequent authors who've served as guest editors, advisors. We also did put out an open call on our blog, now called Forefront, in social media. We did use our HR office to also put out an open call. Partly that's to help improve transparency. And as I said, we did convene a social media campaign, particularly targeted at outreach for diversity, especially through LinkedIn. Then we interviewed candidates, asked them for recommendations, and that's sort of the secret sauce that helped expand our list up to 200 names. We did track a range of fields, including what their current area of study is, their current affiliation. I won't read through this whole list, you can see it. A couple things that were especially helpful is knowing, did they have a connection to our journal, our organization in some way? And we made note of that, and then actually went through and gave them reviewer rankings. We don't typically rank our reviewers in general, but for this exercise we did. And then we created a scoring matrix. And then this is what informed the interview process. So I think the seed list tried to cast as wide a net as possible. And not only was it the people on that we put on the list, we then interviewed those people and had them also recommend people who would be potentially good candidates. And that sort of was the multiplier effect that really extended the scope of who we were considering for an EIC. So our scoring matrix, I don't have a slide on it, and I am willing to share it, but I wanted to say what we particularly looked at there. So was the vision, editorial experience, research experience, topical breadth, because our field is a very multidisciplinary field. In some ways, you have to be a generalist, which is unusual. Network, the networking, it's all about getting those papers in, the profile, sort of the stature of the person, and then last, this sort of ephemeral leadership quality. And we did not rank the candidates on that last quality until after we interviewed them. And what that surfaced for us is, does the person have a bit of an entrepreneurial sense, especially for launching a new journal, which we were doing. That turned out to be a really important facet. And I'm very happy with the EIC we chose, and getting ready to launch in June. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Judie. Jane, I would now like to turn it over to Judie.
Thank you very much. So why don't we shift to the next slide? I'll tell you a little bit about GSA. GSA is the oldest and largest interdisciplinary organization devoted to research, education, and practice in the field of aging. And GSA works to ensure meaningful lives as we age. GSA's 5,400 members include gerontologists, physicians, nurses, pharmacists, social workers, behavioral social scientists, biologists, demographers, economists, and many, many other disciplines. So these experts study all facets of aging with a life course orientation. And the multidisciplinary nature of the GSA membership is a valued strength, enabling the society to provide a 360-degree perspective on the issues facing all of us as we age. So on the next slide, here, the GSA journals are an essential part of the society's role in advancing research in all aspects of aging. So GSA publishes some of the longest running, leading peer-reviewed international journals in gerontology and geriatrics. The GSA editor-in-chiefs help shape and uphold the high standards that GSA has established for the journals. And as you heard, while you see 5 journals on this slide, 2 of them have 2 sections, each with their own editor-in-chief. So we technically have 7 editorial offices. The appointments of journal editor-in-chief serve staggered terms of 4 years, which are not renewable. A GSA program, publications, and products committee, an organizational committee working on behalf of the board of directors, may extend the term of an editor for an additional 1 year if deemed appropriate, or to establish better staggering of editors. The committee tasks volunteer work groups to conduct the editor searches. And work groups have conducted 7 successful searches for editor-in-chief positions in just the last several years. So for this program, on the next slide, I'll share some tips on 3 aspects of the editor search process at GSA: groundwork, nominations, and interviews. So at GSA, we'll start with the groundwork slide. Groundwork begins with a call for up to 7 workgroup volunteers for each editor search. The workgroup's tasked to recommend and recruit candidates, assist with promotion of nominations and editor applications, provide feedback on the process and make recommendations for modifications, review applications for the journal editorship, and interview selected semifinalists. So most of the work group milestones occur January through July, and we ask work group members to commit at least 10 hours, including application review and meetings to discuss applicants. Representation on the work group can include reader constituents, author representatives, early career members, peer editors of non-competitive journals, and scholarly publishing experts. Representation on the work group should be diverse. One of GSA's goals is to increase diversity in ability, age, ethnicity, gender, race, and sexual orientation within our volunteer leadership in order to reflect the demographics of the US and our global society. Diversity should also extend to geographic location, discipline, and career level when possible. Staff and journal editors serve as non-voting advisors on the work groups. And the last bullet on important groundwork at GSA, a toolkit of materials are prepared for the work groups. The toolkit includes a conflict of interest form, recruitment talking points, applicant scoring matrix, pre-interview written questionnaires for semifinalists, interview evaluation forms, draft emails, lead lists, recruitment process milestones, and schedules. So these groundwork activities require at least 2 months at GSA. So moving to the next slide in phase of the search process, nominations and recruitment requires at least 4 months at GSA. Starting with an easy first step, nominations and applications may be submitted by the candidate or others and include just 3 components. 500-word maximum letter of intent with reason for interest in the position, relevant experience, and vision statement for the journal in 5 years, CV, and conflict of interest statement. This first step is easy and straightforward and not complicated or time-consuming for candidates. Building awareness of the editor search beyond the usual promotions and member communications, websites, social media, we cast a wide net as well through direct contact with potential candidates identified by the work group, which include fellows, the highest class of membership within GSA, journal editorial board members, interest groups, there are nearly 70 of them at GSA, and society-wide and member section awardees. And work groups are deliberate with DEI in identifying potential candidates. So as you can imagine, casting a wide net requires a lot of time and resources, which in the past 2 years of the pandemic have disrupted the way we all work. So GSA engaged with consultants for assistance with editor searches. We asked the consultant to email each contact, asking for phone meetings to discuss potential referrals, schedule and conduct telephone calls, assess interest in applying, learn reasons why a person would or would not consider applying, and document the responses. And then last part, gather additional referral names and continue the process to generate new candidates. So the assistance from a consultant allowed our volunteer work group members to focus on personal networking and peer-to-peer recruitment to encourage applications. On my last slide on the interviews phase, this requires at least 1 month at GSA. So starting with selecting viable candidates, using a scoring pool, work group members pre-screen each applicant in 7 categories: editorial experience, broad expertise, communication, leadership, management style, DEI, vision, and overall impression. The scores are aggregated and applicants categorized into tiers. After discussion, work group members select semifinalists to submit the responses to a pre-interview questionnaire and advance to video interviews. For the pre-interview questionnaire, semifinalists are asked to outline their proposed editorial structure, logistics support, journal structure management, their past and present involvement with GSA and the journal, their editorial plan, and their thoughts about future innovations. For each question, semifinalists are asked to provide concise answers, roughly 2 to 3 sentences each, using bullet points to summarize their key points. And they do not need to provide an exhaustive answer because their responses are provided to the work group before their video interview as a basis for discussion during their interview. Each of the interviews are structured and conducted in the same manner. Work group members ask all semifinalists clarifying questions about their vision, leadership and communication style, teamwork, DEI, open science, engaging early career individuals, how they would ensure that the journal stays relevant, attracting submissions, handling ethical situations, resolving conflict, and how they would integrate the work into their daily lives. After all interviews are conducted, the work group members deliberate interview scoring results. When comparing the applicants, a scoring tool reveals ratings in 7 categories: commitment to the editorship responsibilities, vision for the journal, management and leadership potential for the journal, breadth and depth of the field of geriatrics and gerontology, background and experience for the editorship role, effective verbal communication skills, and effective written communication skills. Okay, so shifting to extended deadlines. The takeaway is that extending deadlines is okay because it can allow work groups to consider the widest possible variety of applications and ensure a fair, balanced, and open competition. So at GSA, work groups extended deadlines during the pandemic. And last but not least, incorporating mission-aligned issues in the interview process. To help proactively advance GSA's stated goal of freeing itself from conscious and unconscious discrimination and bias that undermines the society's well-being, the semifinalist interview questionnaire asks, please include a statement of commitment to DEI, providing your career aspirations and contributions towards promoting DEI. Through this statement, you can share how your lived experiences, as well as past, present, and future academic and professional activities have or will contribute to GSA's mission of promoting equity and inclusion. And to help foster age-related bias-free language standards as included in the AMA and APA manuals of style, the semifinalist interview questionnaire asks, GSA partnered with 7 national aging organizations to change the public's understanding of what aging means and many ways that older people contribute to society. The AMA, APA, and GSA style guides have adopted changes consistent with the reframing aging principles. So please describe your understanding of these changes, how you envision fostering these principles as editor of the journal in each of the following areas: with the editorial board, in submissions from authors, with journal reviewers, with post-publication dissemination materials such as blogs, podcasts, Twitter posts, and press releases. So with that, I'll end here. Thank you for this opportunity to share aspects of GSA's journal editor search process. Hope some of this was useful. I'll return the microphone back to Lisa.
Thank you, Judy, for the very thorough and helpful presentation. Now I'd like to have a presentation from Jason Pointe.
Great, thank you, Lisa. And thank you, Jane and Judy. Judie really covered a lot of the nuts and bolts of the tools and process, and we used similar tools for our search process. But next slide, please. We're in a bit of a different situation. The IARS is a much smaller organization. We currently only have 11 total full-time staff, only 2 of us that work on the journals. So we don't have the resources internally to commit to creating and overseeing such an in-depth, extensive process. We really rely on using a proven consultant to provide us with the background and ability to have executed our recruitment. So for us, a lot of it really started in the year before we initiated the search. Laying the groundwork was extremely important for us. One of the main things, and Jane had mentioned this for her organization as well, was doing constituent surveys. We had some clear issues with our previous editor's term that had created some issues with the author pool. And we wanted to take a snapshot just before we went into this process to see where we stood. Were there any of those issues that were going to need to be addressed as part of the search? And if so, how? And so that was something that we did with our commercial publishing partner. And then we also thought it was important to do a stakeholder survey. Because there's another component, we not only are serving our pool of authors and readers, but the way that our journals function requires effective leadership. Lisa had mentioned that, we are an old journal. We're 100 years old last year, the oldest continuously published journal in our specialty. And we do have 15 societies that are affiliated with our journal, and these are pure editorial affiliations. They're not subscription affiliations, so they're extremely important for us to manage and take into account when we're looking at the leadership of our journal. So we had to do a survey that was performed by a consultant for us, interviewing IRS trustees, key staff members, and several long-term editorial board members who represent some of those affiliate societies. And this was really to assess the status and the perception of the incumbent editor's leadership and strategic direction, making sure that we identified those qualities that are necessary in an EIC to drive and motivate the editorial board members to participate and perform as expected. Next slide, please. So with all that information, we sat down, the board of trustees and myself, we established a search committee, and as Jane and Judie with their organizations, the diversity on the search committee was important. We ended up with a search committee of 5 individuals, and they represented a spectrum gender-wise, age and career-wise, and also in ethnicity. And with these individuals, we identified that for our next EIC search, it was going to be extremely important to have diversity in candidates. And again, looking at gender, but also ethnic diversity, geographic diversity. We are not a national journal, we're an international journal in society. So it was important to us that we had candidates who were being submitted from around the world, and also age. We recognized early on in the drive to develop candidates that there was a challenge to overcome a perception in our specialty. This wasn't specific to us and our journals. The feedback we got was that this was something endemic to the specialty. Anesthesiology continues to be a male-dominated specialty, although the numbers, the gender gap is closing. But we had a lot of highly qualified potential female candidates, unsure if they would be considered fairly just because of their experiences in their careers, in faculty promotion selection and other selection. So we worked with our consultant to address that, and I think we addressed it quite effectively. We ended up with some superb candidates that had originally been hesitant. It was extremely important for us, just with the nature of our journal, to look for someone who had a strong academic research record, a strong record of grants and publications. Our board of trustees are all highly accomplished, highly published researchers, and they very much feel that it's one of those, someone's going to gravitate towards someone who has that experience. And it was also important for us, again, being an international journal, to look for an international network, someone who has international presence, international peer recognition. Our board felt that in our previous editor-in-chief, it was someone who hadn't really had a name until they became editor of the journal. So that was a specific consideration that they had. Next slide, please. So for us, again, I think Judie really went through the process in a lot of detail. And for us, again, we used a lot of the same or similar tools. We had an initial review of, it was narrowed down, again, with the help of the consultant. We narrowed our initial review down to 18 of the most qualified candidate submissions. Our search committee members first each individually reviewed all of the submission documents. And these, again, were similar, where it was CV, letter of interest, and answers to some written answers to some guided questions, including how they would address equity and equality, both in the editorial and also in content in the journal, and a number of other questions relevant, just to get some background perspective. We provided the search committee members with a scoring matrix, and the scoring matrix was just used as a guide for the consideration. We didn't use that as a strict, top 5 on the matrix for going through vote. Throughout our process steps, our search committee's chair thought that this was extremely important, that they personally notified the non-selected candidates at each stage, having a one-on-one conversation with them. We wanted to make sure that everybody felt and understood that they had been, fully considered. Next slide, please. So with our second round, these were video interviews that were conducted live with the full search committee. We narrowed it down to a field of 8 candidates selected for these interviews. And for this stage, all of the candidates were asked the same set of 10 questions in order to gauge their editorial nous on really important topics like peer review, preprints, open access, ethics. And in this case, these questions were very specific to our journal and what's going on in our specialty right now that could affect our journal's future. And to make sure that the search committee fully understood the potential answers from the candidates, I worked with them to also provide key points that should be part of the best answers, if you will, for these. And again, this was done so that we were evaluating all of the candidates on the same questions, the same basis. So again, after this, there was another scoring matrix that we used lightly to guide the conversation and consideration of the interviews. There was a lot of discussion, and finally 3 finalists were selected to meet with our full board of trustees in person and give a presentation. And those presentations were much more open. We only gave 3 high-level guide points. Tell us about your relevant experience, how it applies to the future of the journal. Tell us what your strategy might be, and whatever else you wanted to present to sell us on you. And so we had 3 really diverse presentations. It was actually entertaining and worthwhile. And in the end, the full board of trustees did give input in the discussion, but our final decision was made by the 5 members of our search committee. And right now we are very early in our transition process. Our new editor-in-chief that was selected from this process will take over as of October 1st. But we are right now just thrilled. We're really feeling a new sense of energy, and we're absolutely happy with the process.
Thank you, Jason. Appreciate it. That was a great presentation. And now, Sarah Kate.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sara Kate Heukerott, Associate Director of Publications at the Association for Computing Machinery, which is the world's largest society devoted to computer science. And I'm going to give 2 perspectives on EIC searches. And the first comes from my time at Springer Nature, where I and my team oversaw the Springer branded proprietary material science and applied physics journals. Next slide, please. So the first thing I just want to say is EIC searches can feel really overwhelming. It's a big decision. It's a turning point for your journal, and that can feel like a lot to take on. And at a commercial publisher for proprietary journals, these searches will be driven by publisher staff. And sometimes an EIC search, you'll be able to anticipate it. You'll know that a term is ending, but other times it's unexpected. My first EIC search, an EIC tragically passed away after a surgery. And then suddenly, it was really emotionally hard for the whole team. We had to put a group of board members in place to do triage, to sort of stand in as interim EICs, and then we had to launch a search. And the other thing that I found is frequently there isn't a set procedure for doing EIC searches at even a large publisher that has a lot of infrastructure, and you'd think there might be sort of set procedures in place, I sort of had to find my way and figure out a procedure myself. And I really recommend that, people step back, you provide a structure for yourself, draft a timeline with various stages, speak to colleagues who've done previous searches because they have that expertise and you may not know about it. And the other thing I really recommend is seeking out guides. My team, for example, put together a write-up of our EIC search procedures that we put up on our company intranet. And then when you're doing an EIC search, it's really a time to think about how the journal stands and also think about your company's goals for its journals program. Especially at a commercial publisher, there may be a certain strategy, journal strategy, which each of the publications is expected to help support. And that can be various things such as increasing the quality of the publication, quantity of published articles, OA share, diversity in terms of the board, the authors, and the topics covered in the journal. And there are a lot of different things that can go into that. And especially when it's a commercial publisher, I think it's important to choose an EIC who's going to work well with the overall strategy of your organization, because otherwise you can be setting yourself up for conflict. You want an EIC who brings new ideas, is creative, but also will work within the structures that you have, some of the things that just have to work a certain way because that's what your organization does. Another thing I would really recommend is being creative about editorial structure. Just because you've always had one EIC doesn't mean that you have to keep having one EIC. Think about whether a team of 2 or more co-EICs might be more effective, whether it's because of the workload or because they can cover different topic areas. And then also think about what supports the EICs will need, what supports they might expect to have. So tell them what kind of administrative support, what kind of reporting they'll have, so that they have a real sense of what that day-to-day will look like. One other thing that I would recommend for people at other larger organizations to think about is there may be things that aren't geared at EIC searches that might be helpful. So one thing my team did was we used our HR department's DEI checklist, which was used for recruiting of staff members, but we used that checklist when we were putting together our EIC shortlists and then when we were interviewing EIC candidates. Next slide, please. So now I'll turn to our experience at ACM. So ACM is a membership organization. We just celebrated our 75th anniversary. We have over 100,000 members worldwide, and we're a membership organization. We're a volunteer-driven organization. So everything that ACM does is really driven by our members. So we have a publications board that oversees all of the activities of our publications program, and then that board is supported by volunteer committees as well. So we've got a new publications committee that helps to determine how to launch new journals. So sometimes they have an idea for a topic and they go and seek EICs. Sometimes they will have a proposal come to them and they help work with that team to bring the journal to life. And then that new publications committee provides ongoing guidance for new journal EICs, for new journals, for some period into the launch and publication of those journals. Then for our regular program, which as Lisa said is almost 70 journals, which is a lot, and we're a self-published society, EICs can serve for a maximum of 2 3-year terms, and we do a full journal assessment at the end of each term. And as part of that assessment, we collect feedback from the EICs themselves, from journal board members, EICs of related journals, and chairs of our relevant special interest groups, or SIGs. And I should say that all of this work is overseen by our volunteer assessment and search committee, which sort of works tirelessly to support these journals. And then when we're launching an EIC search, again, we have a volunteer search committee. So it's very volunteer driven, and though the members on the committee are all members of our community, not ACM staff. We provide support and guidance, but it's really driven by the community. We'll issue a public call for EIC nominations and self-nominations, And then the search committee also uses their network to get a really rich pool of candidates. Our candidates supply a written vision statement and a CV, and then the search committee, based on that material, or if they need additional material, will then recommend a candidate or a team of candidates to our publications board, and the board then votes to appoint the candidates. And as I said, we're constantly doing these searches because we have so many journals in our portfolio. Next, I'll give some of my top tips for EIC searches on the next slide. So first thing is, you want to know your journal strategy and goals before you start your search. That's really the opportunity to see how your journal stands, where there are areas for improvement. And then I also really recommend avoiding insularity. So seek out those outside your community. And even, I'm a big proponent of talking to people who have negative views of your journal. I think some of the most helpful conversations I've had with people are with people who, have, a negative impression of our journal and think that the journal is doing something not quite right or isn't serving their community. And it's really helpful to probe into those, other views of your publication and ask the hard questions, such as, when did you last submit a paper to our journal? Would you recommend our journal to your most ambitious graduate student? What types of assessment are used for promotion by your institution, by funding agencies? Those are really important information to know how you can best serve your community. And then another thing you want to keep in mind is the timeline. I think a number of the other panelists have also talked about, how long these searches can take. At ACM, we try to start, a year out for the initial questionnaires from EICs who are stepping down, because there's a lot of stages in there. And then, as Judie said, build in a buffer, because, things can go wrong, or you may say, we really need to dig into this. So give yourself that freedom to have that time. And then also have a fallback if your chosen candidate eventually declines. I had this happen where, you have a candidate, you're so excited about them, and then they say, actually, I'm taking on another responsibility. I've thought about it. I really can't do it. And that, your heart drops at that moment. But then you have to sort of step back, say, what can we do? And one thing that I've found that worked really well is to try a group of maybe 2 to 7 sort of interim EICs is to sort of serve in that role for a set period while you relaunch your search, but also to include in that group people you hope might decide, oh, actually, I really like this. And then they get to do the day-to-day work. They say, actually, this is really exciting. And maybe, a few of them emerge as people who are really engaged. And you might find you get a team of editors out of that who you wouldn't have thought to put together. So I think don't be too hard on yourself if there are setbacks, and try to be creative and positive in all of this. So I hope you find these perspectives helpful, and then I think we'll turn it over to the Q&A.
Thank you very much, Sara, Kate, and all the panelists for those excellent presentations. I see that there are several great questions in the chat, but before we turn to that, I'd like to make sure we cover onboarding, since that was part of the title of the webinar. Jason, you had mentioned you're starting your onboarding process now for October. So that's about a 6-month onboarding process. Is that typical for your journal?
I joined the organization at the transition between our previous editor-in-chief and our current editor-in-chief, and so that was my first experience with our organization handling the transition and onboarding, and it took about 6 months there. In this case, I think due to the candidate that was selected, we have the luxury of not necessarily needing the full 6 months. The individual did have prior high-level editorial experience, and just it comes to us with a breadth of talents that allow us some latitude. But the 6 months is good because it's allowed me to sort of map out at a good pace, starting with, okay, if I know that October 1st is going to be the transition date, I can take a look at the editorial and production schedule, and we've worked back from there, so we know which issue is going to be the first one that the new EIC has to be responsible for in terms of lineup, editorials, and whatnot, and have thereby been able to work back that schedule of, okay, for these issues, it's going to be the incumbent EIC, and then we'll bring in the EIC elect to start working on the lineups and makeup of these issues. And it's also given us an ability to set a transition date for obviously the incumbent EIC is not going to be responsible for selection of papers through until October 1st. Because those papers won't be in his issues. So we've been able to set those dates. So those are hard dates to work around. And we've got that taken care of. We spent the first month, we started April 1st, and we spent the first month with the new EIC. It's kind of a whirlwind, but having him have introductory calls with the key people that are part of the support team. So I've had several one-on-one calls with him. Our managing editor has had separate calls with him, and our deputy editor-in-chief, because all three of us are carrying on under the new EIC and will continue our support roles. And now going into May and June, we're beginning to set up a series of calls with the new EIC with the leadership of our 15 affiliate societies. Because again, they're extremely important to our journal and our relationships. Also, having him run through meetings with the various section editors so that we can take a measured approach to how we want to handle transition of the editorial board. So again, we're in a spot of having a luxury of someone who is coming in sort of already knowing how to ride the horse. And so we're able to look more into these details of, what aspects do we have to look at? What changes do we want to make? Do we want to change our editorial board structure? And what would the timing need to be on that? So it's really been a different experience than last time, where I had an editor-in-chief coming on with no experience, and the entire focus was 6 months of on-the-job training just to get that individual up to speed, to know what decisions they needed to make and how to approach them. So I'll let you know with the next search, Lisa, what we need to do with the next onboarding.
Helpful. Thank you very much. Mike Groth, I believe you've been monitoring the chat for the questions.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Mike Groth. I'm KGL's marketing director. I'm running the webinar behind the scenes. And we've got a number of questions that have come in via the chat and the Q&A panel. So one of them is time sensitive. Someone needs to drop off. And she says, I've heard from several search committee members they are prohibited in their country from asking race, gender, and age, which is complicating the D&I efforts. I'm wondering if others have started to see such problems pop up in their EIC and editorial board searches.
Panelists.
So we didn't actually ask DE&I questions point blank. So that's how we dealt with it.
All right, I will move to the next question. We have 10 minutes left.
Well, I'll throw in on that one as well, that for us, it wasn't a matter of asking DEI questions. With us in trying to develop our candidate pool, we worked with our consultant to specifically target a wide range. And so it wasn't a matter of asking someone for their gender or ethnicity. The consultant was conducting interviews to try and get names, and those were just judged based on the qualifications of the person who was recommending and the qualifications of the individual. We were taking the DEI issue, I think, a bit of a step back and just sort of monitoring the balance of the candidate pool as they came in, and redirecting our efforts. But we weren't overtly asking upfront DEI related questions, because it can be a challenge logistically and legally.
I will just add that we've started collecting demographic information on a voluntary basis as people submit papers to the journal. So we're sort of using that as some benchmarking for us. And I will also say we did look at the institution, whether candidates were from minority serving institutions as well.
Thank you. Next question, Mike.
This one was for Jane, asked early on. You said that you asked candidates to recommend other candidates. Why were they willing to recommend competitors?
I should clarify, the candidates were people on the seed list. So there were people we thought might make good candidates, but for whatever reason, they may say, oh, I'm not interested. And then we had our consultant who did these phone calls for us follow up and say, well, can you recommend, like, who do you think would make a good EIC candidate? And that's how we actually got some names that we wouldn't have even thought of. And I will say too that seed list then formed the basis of our editorial board candidate pool as well.
Thank you, Jane.
Okay, a question for the panel. Can you please mention how you determine the time commitment for the EIC position? I've heard level of submissions, but are there any other considerations you would suggest?
I mean, at ACM, it's sort of across the board that it's 3 years, maximum of 6 years. And it's the idea that we don't want someone staying in that role forever, so that we have a sort of refresh and new people can give the journals new direction.
So I think the question was around the hours that the editor would put in, and is that dependent on volume, or is it, and of course related to compensation for the editor-in-chief, and how is that determined, the time and the compensation?
So at ACM, they're volunteers, and at Springer Nature, it was more a matter of, we talk to them about their expectations and then decide how many people we needed based on availability.
And with us, we're going from a situation where, there was a contractual commitment in the current editor-in-chief's papers. And with the new editor-in-chief, we avoided a percentage of time commitment, and instead just agreed upon a mutually beneficial, salary. But the actual time commitment with the new EIC is going to be understood to depend on not only volume of submissions, but also the makeup, organization, and working structure of the editorial board moving forward.
Judie, you look like you were going to weigh in there.
I was just going to add that at GSA, we do provide at baseline just the journal metrics and trends for candidates to consider. But when it gets to the question about time commitment, that's when we encourage candidates to connect directly with any of our current journal editor-in-chiefs so that they can have a deep dialogue around, what's involved and what they do and how their boards are structured and have that level of conversation.
Next question, Mike.
For a new journal launch, what are your views on conducting an open search, which means going public on the not yet launched journal well before it is ready, versus conducting the search quietly by direct targeted recruitment, even though that process is very time and labor intensive?
I can speak to that because that was exactly our core vision statement for the journal already created, and we're able to speak to that. Again, we published that on our blog. We also published some of the results of the author survey we did. Again, partly, once you do a survey too, That also is going public, if you will. So overall, I think I would lean on the side of going public, sort of building anticipation.
We have time for one more, it looks like. No, you're muted there, Mike.
Sorry, internet issues. It sounds like 1 year is the ideal timeline to conduct a search and confirm the new EIC, followed by 6 months for onboarding. What would an expedited timeline look like if you are at a sudden loss of an editor-in-chief?
I guess I can speak to this because I've had this happen a couple of times. I think you want to put someone in place right away in an interim position and then actually take the time to do a proper search. But I have done, expedited searches in, maybe 3 months where I just am on the phone or on Zoom constantly with candidates, board members, and just really finding who we need.
And I've got a little experience with that too from my previous role with a commercial publisher handling proprietary journals. And it really depends on the journal, on the needs of the journal, and on your constituent pool. If you're dealing with a journal that serves a relatively small community, and there's not going to be a huge range of people outside of that regular author pool and people who are involved in the peer review anyway, then you can conduct a quicker, more focused search. But with a large journal, an international journal, we really needed to have that long timeline. I wouldn't have wanted to have been forced into a quick situation.
Thank you. Just a couple minutes left. I'd like to just circle back to something that Sara Kate touched on, which is the editor-in-chief terms. Do the panelists have an average term that you use, be it 1 5-year term, a 5-year renewable term, and just kind of take a quick poll on that.
5-year renewable.
5-year renewable.
They're 4-year with 1 year additional, but that seems to work best for us.
Okay, we are at time. I'd like to thank our panelists, Jane, Judie, Jason, and Sara Kate, for taking the time to share their experience around the editor-in-chief search process and onboarding. And thanks to everyone for spending an hour with us today. I hope this has been helpful. As a reminder, we'll be sending a link to the recording that will be hosted on the KGL website to all registrants. Hope you have a wonderful day.